Power utility Eskom has cancelled a 100 million rand tender linked to the niece of the former chair of the board, Jabu Mabuza. And let's find out what the Mail and Guardian has been reporting. We're talking tonight to senior investigative journalist Sabelo Skiti. Sabelo, thank you for being with us. So I asked firstly, what were the red flags around this contract that led to it being cancelled?
Good evening, Tepiso. So the contract in itself was quite strange. Besides the fact that the relationship between Nomvula Mabuza and the then chairman, Jabu Mabuza, wasn't declared on both sides, it seemed as if Nomvula Mabuza's pricing when she submitted her bid was so low that, when they sent the team to negotiate, a better deal, they came back and they said that even if the second place bidder were to, drop their prices drastically, they still couldn't match, the price that had been put up by IDS Africa. Of course, now from a procurement perspective, there's a lot of risk that's associated with a company that comes in almost too low to be able to do the work. Yet, Eskom's, adjudication team saw no problem with this. They accepted it. And then when they went to negotiate the finalities of the contract, Nomvula Mabuza informed them that a couple of zeros were missing from a bid. She in error, forgot to add a couple of zeros. And as a result, then, when the final contract was signed, her bid was increased by 10 million rand.
Wow. So is there any indication here that Jabu Mabuza had influence over this contract and tried to make his niece rich through Eskom?
So to sort of understand the whole thing, you got to look at, the entire picture. The 100 million rand contract is one of two contracts that Nomvula's company bid for. The second contract would have secured IDS 70% of 11 billion rand in similar maintenance work. Now, both of these contracts were issued, I think, months apart. The 100 million rand one was issued in February 2018. And then, the other one was much later. I think it was about October when it was advertised. From what we were able to pick up is that the fact that there was no declaration on her side, and then when it came to Eskom in itself doing what we call probity. So probity test, basically, when you submit a bid in an SOE or a government department, the internal people at supply chain would then run your name in the system to see if there's any relations that you haven't declared. Now, for some reason, in this particular contract, that was not done. Whenever we've engaged with Eskom and Mr. Mabuza through his chief of staff over this, he always insists that he had no idea that Nomvula Mabuza had actually bid for these two contracts. But if you look at, the timing of the company being set up, it's only when Jabu Mabuza becomes chairman of the Eskom board that Nomvula Mabuza then, registers this company and then starts bidding for work at Eskom.
Yeah. All right, so he's denied any knowledge. Let's just be clear that this is a man who's come out very strongly about corruption. He spoke about state capture at Eskom. It certainly would be extremely disappointing if there were any claims that he did become involved in personally.
Look, not only spoken strongly about corruption at Eskom. If you remember at the time when South Africa, its perception out in the world was very, very bad. It was associated with corruption and the previous administration and the president then. Then Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan actually appointed Jabu Mabuza to be the person that went with him when he was going on road shows to London, to the United States, to the Middle East to try and lure investments. Jabu Mabuza was the face of business. And everything he said at those platforms basically spoke about the fact that we want to do clean business. We encourage clean business as South African business. And we want to bring investors with the knowledge that when they come and transact in South Africa. Everything will be done above board.
Yeah. Finally, is this being investigated now by Eskom? Could more details come out? And then you report as well that one of the non-exec directors, Sifiso Dabengwa, resigned over this very issue. Just describe that conflict within the board right now.
So, I think what is beginning to emerge, specifically with the resignation of Sifiso Dabengwa, is that once again Eskom is finding itself right in the center of business groupings that basically want to gain hegemony inside the company in terms of getting contracts. The reason Sifiso Dabengwa resigns, we understand, is that there had been a fuel oil tender, also worth some billions, that had been advertised by Eskom. And what had happened is that the chief procurement officer was unhappy with some of the due diligence. And when he raises his unhappiness is when this contract is at the stage where the board must approve, the final 4 companies that the executive have put forward for this contract. It was going to be split between the 4 of them. When he raises his displeasure and he says, so some of the due diligence that we should have done here, we haven't done. We don't know about the financials of some of these companies, and therefore there's a risk that we might contract them to give us billions in product, and they won't be able to actually, deliver. So the contract gets put aside on ice. Vim Trengo, senior counsel, gets appointed to actually investigate. So it does its forensic, it gets presented to the board, and apparently Mr. Dabengwa takes exception with some of the findings, in that investigation, and, the rest of the board, supposedly, at least a majority, feels strong enough to say that on the basis of the report, that action must be taken, about the contract. So that is what we understand the resignation to have been about. And as I said, for me, it actually tells us that we're at that stage again where Eskom, which, was one of the sites for state capture, more than 100 billion rand, we believe, was stolen, by entities in Eskom, and it looks like, that behavior hasn't stopped.
Well, that begs my final question. I promise now, why is Jan Oberholzer still there, the COO? If, as you report, he was found to have negotiated a contract with a company he has shares in and apparently instructed a subordinate to find a job for a relative.
Well, I think, these are some of the more interesting issues that we hope Eskom will speak about in the near future. So Mr. Oberholzer, since he's come back into Eskom, has been involved in a number of, interesting and rather questionable things. So the first one is he gets mentioned in terms of what is happening at the Zondo Commission. In one submission, and again, he gets mentioned in an SIU investigation looking into the delays into Kusile and Medupi. We know not too long ago that Eskom, also announced that it was initiating a process of recovering monies from companies that it believes overcharged it. So one of these companies is a construction company called Stefanuti Stock, where Mr. Oberholzer was an employee and also has shares. The latest allegations are that when he came back, Mr. Oberholzer negotiated a contract with Stefanuti Stocks without actually declaring that, he was a shareholder in the company and therefore had an interest. That immediately places him in a conflicted situation because you don't know when he's negotiating whether he has the interest of Eskom at heart or whether he has the interest of, his shareholding in that business. And then it also... then much later, he then instructed a subordinate. He actually, I'm told, forwarded a name and a CV for a position that I believe is in Cape Town. And he doesn't say to the subordinate that this is a close relative of mine. But he says, this gentleman is looking for work. Please make sure you find something, reach out to him and let's get him on board.
All right, so these are some of the issues facing Eskom besides keeping the lights on. Thank you for following that and for that update, Mail and Guardian senior investigative journalist Sabelo Skiti.